We now turn to looking at our good dead friend, David Hume. Little background for Hume. He was born in 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland, and he was born to a Calvinist family. He attended Edinburgh University, which is, I believe, still there today. He studied literature and philosophy, and like all ambitious young Europeans at the time, he went to France and wrote his work, a treatise of human nature. His dream, which many have, was to achieve literary fame, but sadly and tragically, his book was met not with anger, but with the worst of all emotions from the standpoint of an author, namely indifference. In his quote, which is kind of disturbing, he said the work fell dead-born from the press. In 1745, because of his skeptical and religious views, he was denied a position in ethics at Edinburgh University. Now, having faced these failures, he didn't give up. In 1748, he engaged in a classic strategy, one that I would certainly recommend because I've done it myself. If you have a work that fails, one thing you can do is don't give up, but revise it and keep trying. So what he did is he took the first two parts of the treatise and revised them in a more popular style and released it with a new title. In this case, An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. In 1751, he revised the third part of the treatise as An Inquiry Concerning the Principles of Morals. In 1752, he was denied a position at the University of Glasgow. In 1757, he published his Natural History of Religion, which was his account of the genesis of the religious impulse. Then, his final work, at least in philosophy, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, was published after his death. Not by him, of course, because he was dead, and no undead stuff going on here, but by someone else, of course. Now, he wrote other stuff as well. In 1754 to 1762, he wrote a very successful 6-volume history of England. In 1763, he went to Paris as the assistant to the English ambassador, and was quite a celebrity, and apparently engaged in correspondence with such notables as our own Benjamin Franklin. He died in 1776, nothing to do with the American Revolution, but most likely cancer or ulcerative colitis. He was extremely well liked and seen as kind and gentle, and the street he lived on was called St. David because that was his nickname. And of course, he's still dead today. Now, although Hume is sometimes cast as being an atheist, he's not. One of the many important things to note in philosophy is that just because someone has doubts about God doesn't mean they're an atheist. In fact, we have a term for this. It's being agnostic. So if someone's a theist, they definitely believe in whatever God you're talking about. If someone is an atheist, then they definitely don't believe in that God. If someone is agnostic, they don't know. So Hume is most accurately characterized as a skeptic. So he doesn't come out and definitively say there's a God. He doesn't definitively say there is no God. What he says is all the arguments fail. Now, his approach is this. He claims there are two ways to argue for God's existence. The a priori, that is, pure reason, not based in the senses, and the a posteriori, arguments based in empirical foundations, arguments that occur after experience. And he claims both of these fail. And what he's doing is an argument by extermination. If there's only two possible options and neither of them are going to work, there's no way to do it. This, of course, requires establishing and proving that there are only two possible options and both fail. But he believes he does so to his satisfaction. Now, he's cautious in his conclusion. again, he doesn't say these arguments fail, there is no God. He says these arguments fail, therefore they fail. So they do not give us a reason to believe in God. And so he's a very careful thinker here. Now, in his dialogues concerning natural religion, he focuses on theistic proofs. And it's a dialogue, so it's talking. Essentially, it's, like a play, a scripted play. And it's got 3 characters. Now, thanks to Plato and others, dialogues were once really popular in philosophy. And occasionally a philosopher still cranks one out, and they're usually terrible. I tried writing one once, and it was pretty bad. So maybe someday. So what are the 3 characters? First, there is Cleanthes. He is a theist who presents a posteriori arguments for God's existence. There's also Demia, who is pious and orthodox, relying on faith in a priori arguments. Philo is a skeptic, and since Philo does all the winning, that is most likely Hume's view. When you get a dialogue written by a philosopher, or anyone for that matter, generally the character that wins, that looks the best, is typically expressing the view of the author. Now, it's not impossible that someone would write a dialogue that the winning position, that the best character totally goes against their own views, but that would be pretty unusual, but not impossible. So, in this, Hume argues that all the standard arguments for God's existence fail. And even if these arguments do support there being a first cause, an argument that Aristotle gave way back, he claims this first cause will be very, very different from the orthodox view of God. And so he's got kind of a double attack. One is all the arguments fail to prove God's existence, and even if you were able to show there must be a first cause, and he's somewhat amenable to that, this is a long way from establishing the God of any particular religious, doctrine. So what is his argument as to why both types of reasoning fail? What grounds his skepticism? Well, the following way. The character of Philo, again, most likely speaking for Hume, argues that reason is not sufficient to establish a matter of fact. So, contrary to what people like Leibniz and our good dead friend Descartes claimed, who are rationalists, and also St. Anselm. St. Anselm's whole deal was, by pure reason, you can establish a matter of fact, namely that God exists. So, Hume, Philo speaking for Hume, says that all claims about existence are claims about matters of fact, and all of these, including claims about God. So he doesn't give God like a special, exemption here. So because if you take these two together, reason cannot establish a matter of fact, all claims about existence are claims about a matter of fact, it follows that a priori reasoning cannot establish the existence of anything. This would include God. Again, he doesn't throw out a special exception for God here. Now, part of his reasoning here is this. Taking a clear shot at the ontological argument, he claims that anything you can conceive of as existing, you can also, contrary to St. Anselm, you can conceive of it as not existing. So, he concludes, there is no being whose existence is demonstrable. In this sense, demonstrable meaning provable through deductive logic, being able to show a priority by deductive reasoning with absolute conclusive conclusion. Now, he doesn't throw away necessity entirely. And again, in this context, necessity doesn't mean like food and shelter, things you got to have to survive. It means something that must be, either must be true or must exist. Now, he does accept that must be true, that form of necessity, applies only to relations of ideas and not matters of fact. So, to use the usual example, if you were to ask Hume before he died, must triangles always have three sides? He would say, sure, of course. That's just a relation of idea. By definition, triangle three-sided, all triangles have three sides. Or if you were to ask him, so are all bachelors unmarried? He would say, yeah, of course, by definition. If someone's a bachelor, by definition, they're unmarried. But these are all relations of ideas. They tell you nothing about the world. So, for example, if you were hanging out with Hume, and you said, hey, if Bill is a bachelor, he's not married, right? And Hume would say, yeah, of course. If he's a bachelor, he's not going to be married. But then if you asked, is Bill a bachelor? He might say, well, he's not wearing a ring, and he's trying to pick up people, but who knows? Maybe he is, maybe he's not. We'd have to find out empirically. We can't know a priori. So Hume's view is you can't know matters of fact a priori. Now, from this he infers that necessity only applies to relations of ideas and not matters of fact. And what this entails for him is there is no necessary being. And he believes this would short out, defeat any argument that is based on God being a necessary being, which we saw when we were talking about our good dead friend Thomas Aquinas about possibility and necessity. So he thinks, in this case, that a priori reasoning fails to do this. It cannot be used to prove God's existence. But that still leaves the possibility of a posteriori arguments trying to prove God's existence. So he's got to clear those out too. So how does he do that? Well, this takes us to his next line of attack. Now, he's looked at the ontological argument and said, nope, that doesn't work. He also considers the cosmological arguments, namely arguments that are based on the assumption that all events have a cause, that anything that is potential must be caused by something actual. Now, what he uses here relies on his arguments regarding causation. And if you take the class in epistemology and metaphysics, you'll see these arguments. Now, squishing them down, essentially what he does is this. He says, empirically, no matter how often we look at things occurring, we never see a necessary connection. For example, take the example he uses of billiard, and it's actually different from pool, but we'll just use them interchangeably. And so if you see a pool cue hit a ball and it hits other balls, and you look at it, you see one thing followed by another, but you never see a necessary connection. And so what Hume reasons is like this. So suppose, we'll use a silly example. Back when I was an undergrad, I had a old black and white TV, no cable, just, rabbit ear antennas. And of course, it didn't get that great reception. And one time it was, all snowy, etc. And I snapped my fingers and the picture became crystal clear. And, the people there with me looked at me like, how'd you do that? And I said, well, magic, obviously. Now, if you saw me do that, you'd probably think, yeah, that's just, coincidence. You don't see any necessary connection. Now, if it happened again, you still see nothing different. I snap my finger, the TV clears up. So the third or fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh time, it still looks exactly the same. Snap my fingers, it clears up. So what's the difference between the first time it happens, where you'd probably say, yeah, that's just coincidence, and, I don't know, around about the 5th or 10th or 20th, where people would probably start saying, I guess it does something. And Hume's answer is, there is no difference. If this was recorded, me snapping my fingers and the TV clearing up, and you took the, the film and then split it up into pictures and handed them out of order, you wouldn't see at any point something magically appearing showing this causal connection. You just see one thing followed by another. So what Hume says happens is this. After we see it happen so many times, we form a habit from this constant conjunction, and we expect it to happen next. So first time, you'd probably think, just coincidence. About the fifth or sixth time, you'd probably start thinking, maybe there's something here. But it's just habituation. Now, a good analogy for this actually takes place long after Hume, but it's the story of Pavlov's dog, which apparently is not entirely accurate, but here's how the story is usually presented. Pavlov had a dog, he'd ring a bell, feed the dog. Ring the bell, feed the dog, ring the bell, feed the dog. And then, according to the tale, he could ring the bell and the dog would think the food would appear because of habituation. And so on Hume's view, we would be like Pavlov's dog. We expect the effect to happen after what we think is the cause. So, for Hume, causation is a habit we build based on observation. So how does he use this to go after the causal argument and also, the design argument as well? Again, the design argument is that you see a design to the world and you infer that there must be a designer and this must be God. So here's how he does it. Again, he's assuming that causation is a habit based on observation of one thing happening after another. Eventually you start feeling that one thing causes another. So, Hume, speaking through Philo, does note that it's rational to conclude that a specific house had a builder because we've observed houses being built. We have these empirical observations. Now, in the case of the universe, we only have the universe to observe. And another major flaw is we didn't see it being built. So we don't have this constant conjunction between universes and their causes. So there can be no empirical argument, according to Hume, based on causation. I mean, crudely put, we didn't see it happen, and so we can't engage in this causal reasoning. Now again, this argument rests on Hume's view of how we analyze causation, and rests on a lot of assumptions. So not, automatically decisive. So that's his attack on the notion that all things have a cause. Essentially, we didn't see it happen, so we can't make the inference from universe to God. As we can do in the case of if you see a house, you've seen houses being built, so you can say house, therefore builder. In the case of the universe, we can't make that leap. It's like universe, maybe builder, maybe not. Now, what about the explicit design argument? And the classic argument from design is, of course, the idea being that you look at the universe, it seems well designed, no design without a designer. The only one who could design the universe is God, therefore God exists. Now, his attack on the argument from design is, in many ways, an anticipation of Darwin's notion of survival of the fittest. And, interestingly enough, the idea of what we'd call natural selection goes way back to the ancient Greeks. There was a pre-Socratic philosopher who advanced the idea that there would be, all kinds of random animals born, like, cows with sticks for legs, and the ones that don't work very well just die. That's why you don't see them. And the ones that work, they survive. That's why things seem designed. And so the notion of this, natural selection, evolution, etc., is ancient. People often say Darwin did it, but he's not the inventor of that notion, but he did all the, work and wrote the book and really got it out there. So still, credit to him. So this is what he does. Having a design world involves a mechanistic assumption or metaphor. The world is built like a clock. And Hume says, the world plainly resembles more an animal or a vegetable than it does a watch or a knitting loom. And he advances, again, kind of the evolution, natural selection argument. He argues that if an animal did not match its environment, then it would not survive. It would perish. So, animals that survive would be ideally suited to the environment. So they would seem designed, but they would not be. It would essentially be natural selection. Now again, he doesn't say, and therefore there is no God. He essentially is being skeptical. He's saying, okay, every argument that's being advanced, he says, here's a reason to not accept this argument. He doesn't say, therefore there is no God. he says the conclusion is essentially not supported. So skeptical rather than atheist. Next, we'll take a look at his 5 problems for arguments for God, which don't really parallel Aquinas' 5 ways, but perhaps his 5 problems were intended to parallel not the content of the 5 ways, but sort of 5 problems against Aquinas' 5 ways. So next time, the 5 problems of Hume.